Freedom, published in 1943, written by James Burnham. What does it mean to be Machiavelian?
Have you read this book, Keith? Have you?
I did. I got quotes and everything from it.
Yeah, it's a great.
Yeah.
It's really a 20th century classic, and there are not a lot of 20th century classics, but especially in this genre. But when there are, and this is absolutely. James Burnham tends to be better known for The Managerial Revolution, which is a book that far more people have read. When I found a copy of the Machiavelians in a used bookstore, just randomly in a used bookstore in like 2005, you could still buy a copy online. By like 2012, you can no longer buy a copy online, and now it's been reprinted, so you can get copies online again. But it was a book that had vanished in a lot of ways for a lot of people, and that's because it simply fits. It just ruthlessly breaks you out of the mold of sort of the political conventions and illusions that you live in, and it says, okay, you are not alone in not understanding how you are ruled at all. You are not alone in being ruled by psychological means. Everyone throughout history has been ruled through psychological means. Let's understand how this works. The sources that it cites, has a couple of its own essays and a number of sort of treatments of sources. The most readable and best is probably Gaetano Mosca, who wrote around a little before 1900. His book is called, in English, it's called Theory of the Ruling Class, but in Italian, it's Elements of Political Science. Go figure. I would much rather call it Elements of Political Science, because I think in some ways Mosca is really the Darwin of political science, except that Darwin, was burned at the stake by the church. He wasn't burned at the stake, but clearly his perspective has not really, it's not sort of taught as, certainly not as current theory in today's political science departments. That the closest you'll get to what Burnham is talking about, the sort of the school of political scientists that Burnham is talking about, is sometimes called the Italian school or the Italian elitist school of political science. They're from, you can't really call them fascists, because they're from the generation before fascism. You can't really call someone a fascist when there was no such thing as fascism. And in general, you see sort of that trend, and kind of the right wing, or the opposition to the establishment, sort of becomes more plebeian and kind of stupider as the 20th century goes on. And so, if you think of these people as right wingers, they're sort of more like the Sicilian aristocrat character in The Leopard, right? And they're Italians, of course, right? And so they have very good taste. And the closest thing, so some people in academia today study Carl Schmitt, who is, again, from a later generation, but, sort of a similar scholar. I like the Italians a little. Schmitt is very good. I like the Italians a little better, because they're sort of more concrete, and they kind of delve less into kind of murky Teutonic philosophy. They're very, very straightforward and down to earth. So, for example, one of the things, the essay that Burnham starts the Machiavelians with, which I believe is called Dante, Politics as Myth, is an absolutely just the searing and beautiful work, because you realize he's introducing this work of Dante, like not the some NFL cornerback, like the Dante you've heard of, and he's introducing Dante's work on political science called De Monarchia, in which basically Dante believes in takes a his Ghibelline argument. I think he was a Ghibelline, not a Guelph, and makes this argument for universal monarchy, right? He's and which is totally everyone forgets this work, because it's not it's a work of fantastic political science. It's not the Inferno or the Paradiso, right? And so basically here comes Burnham, right? And he's basically describing this work of Dante's, and then he sort of narrates it, and he's explaining, kind of paraphrasing Dante, and then you realize he's going to rip it to fucking shreds. This guy is basically taking on Dante, and he's and the way in which he's taking on Dante is so beautiful, because he says, okay, here's Dante. What is he actually saying? Well, what he's saying is just complete mumbo jumbo and makes no fucking sense at all. So why is he saying it? why he's saying it is because, and then Burnham goes into the real details of like the ugly ass political, like total Sopranos tier, like, you know, like political scene that Dante is embedded in, and just like all this just like ugly ass stuff, probably better than actually people knew it at the time. And so he's like, if you take this thing and you read it literally, it's a bunch of BS. But if you take it and read the subtext, what it's saying is that my guys should triumph and yours should be scattered to the winds, right? and that translation is sort of so effective. And then he sort of spends the rest of the book explaining how to translate that into the terms of your sort of current political universe that you're in at the time, and how to essentially, you know, it's very all the you know, it's very easy to dispel, you know, the matrix that Dante was in, you know, 600 years later. You can red pill that all you want, right? But to basically look at the world you're in and basically like be like, what do I believe in unquestioningly? That's just obviously a bunch of ridiculous BS. You know, as Orwell said, you know, what's in front of your nose is the hardest to see. Understanding sort of power and how it works through that kind of completely realist Machiavellian eye is what you have to do. And this is why Burnham calls the book the Machiavellians Defenders of Freedom.
Now, I love how when talking about...
You're like, no, Machiavelli wasn't... Does that make sense? I lost you for a sec.
Yep. And do you have me?
I have you.
Okay.
Your resolution's improved again.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think I interrupted you because I had stopped hearing anything on your end. So why does he call it the Machiavellians Defenders of Freedom?
He calls it the Machiavellians Defenders of Freedom because to defend the truth is to defend freedom. And, you know, essentially freedom of thought is of no importance at all and, in fact, harmful unless it's freedom to think the truth. But, you know, once you have... you know, once that freedom to not just to think the truth, but to think in terms of the truth, because to think in terms of the truth, you know, I mean, this is speaking in truth, as you know, Solzhenitsyn calls it, like living in truth, is essentially the same problem. And if you have to basically construct all of your mathematics around the theory that 2 + 2 is 5, you know, that's going to affect a lot more than 2 + 2 is 5. I mean, how often every day do you add 2 and 2, right? You know, you could go through it like just make it a social convention. You know, every time you buy 2 things and they're $2 each, it comes out to 5, right? You know, you can work around it, you know, but it starts to like get into like your theorems and stuff. Like, you know, like you have some pretty strange, you know, non-mathematics to basically to account for that. And that's why, you know, that's why that sort of equivalence is so important. And when you lose the ability to think, like you can lose anything else, right? I mean, you know, you can go all the way to various kinds of Jonestowns, and you know, we certainly have seen the two most catastrophic events in which society really Jonestowns itself are the French and Russian revolutions. We've seen very smaller versions of that, but you know, one couldn't help. Trump made this weird tweet recently where he's just like, I was just trying to stop the country from killing itself. And I was just like, that's a moment of just complete insanity or complete genius, and I cannot tell which. Of course, Burnham later writes a book, which is good, although maybe not as good, called The Suicide of the West. But, you know, the point of the Machiavellians is he's approaching, you know, that's a book that will feel inevitably somewhat dated because it's a book from the Cold War. And the Machiavellians is approaching, not only it's written in the middle of the war, when maybe even to some people the outcome still feels in doubt. And so it's written in a way that really transcends this post-war era that we live in. And that's one of the things that makes it, you know, you always feel that books written before 1940 have this kind of broader scope of ambition and sense than those written afterward. And this is kind of this sort of very late flower of that first half of the 20th century. So really, I would say it's, you know, my favorite introduction to political science. I can't think of a better one.
it's one of those where, like, on page 1, you're just hooked. He goes, let's start with the 1932 Democratic Platform. And then you read it, and it's things like the government needs to, in short, the government needs to stop growing as fast as it is. It's getting out of control. He goes, what are we to make of these? And this is where he gets real meanings or real aims versus the formal meanings and the formal aims. In today, if you're watching politicians today or CNN, what are some of the major real meanings versus formal meanings?
So an example I was just thinking about, and this is an example that all of your viewers will without question recognize and understand, is, let's take the strong interest in gun control of American progressives. Now, why are they so interested in fighting your Second Amendment rights? Is it because they're evil? No, absolutely not. It's because they're Machiavelians, and they understand being Machiavellian at a sort of deeper, there's kind of no conflict in their souls when it comes to thinking in a Machiavellian way. And so their hearts are thinking about this massacre or the other massacre or whatever massacres. The total of whose deaths add up to the number of people that fell off of ladders, this year, like considerably less, right? And so, if these people are motivated by, the actual, deaths of innocents caused by firearms, I mean, I think most of the people, it varies, but I think for most of the people using ladders, they're probably just as innocent. They probably made some bad choices, as did the people who were killed by guns, but not maybe. But many of the people who fell off ladders, completely innocent, right? And they're just, this thing destroys their life. They should have hired someone. Is it really that this is what is bothering these people, or really the cause there of this sort of intensification of their emotion, when we know perfectly well that they're very happy to drown out these emotions, if some ISIS terrorist runs someone over in a semi-truck, right? There the emotion must be suppressed. We must not, overreact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can take this story both ways. And why is it always taken in the direction that it's taken? What is the sort of fundamental energy there? Well, obviously, of course, the lib looks at all of these armed cons and is like, oh my God, there's like 67 Panzer divisions out there, and the only thing they're lacking is they can't buy any ammo right now, and otherwise we'll be swept into the sea. Moreover, they think that we think like them. And because they think that we think like them, they're like, any minute now they will get together and sweep us into the sea, because that's sort of exactly what anyone who seriously cared about or understood power would do. And they seriously care about and understand power. And the idea that their enemies supposed enemies actually don't, and they don't really have enemies, they just have victims, is not one that fits within their brains, right? And so, that is essentially the sort of the source of the political energy that causes them to want to ban your AR-15 is, of course, the desire to disarm this incipient army out there, and not, the ostensible goal of preventing the next school shooting. Now, that's not to say that school shootings aren't sad. They're very sad, but they don't really, they wouldn't even be a blip on the radar if it were not for this basically emotional political cause.
I think it's page 45, he discusses two types of political men, the ruler type and the ruled type. The outstanding aspect of the majority is its political passivity. The ruler type characteristics consists of ambition, fraud, and ability to adapt to the times, continuing on page 66, saying, it is through these, religion is essential to the well-being of the state. So, are those two connected, or am I just connecting them in my head? And what are your thoughts on those?
I would explain these things maybe in a slightly different sense. First of all, there's no question that not only do most people, like the circle of people who are actually in the loop. There's a nice Armando Iannucci film called In the Loop. The set of people who are actually in the loop in any oligarchical system is much smaller than the set of people who feel in the loop, because you might have noticed that a lot of people interact with politics in a very similar way to their interaction with professional sports, except that of course they have absolutely no skin in the game in professional sports, and they have absolutely no power over quote unquote their team, right? And yet, their brains are stimulated in the same way. So in a sense, the feeling of being important has the same relationship to actual importance in this case, I would argue, that pornography has to sex, right? Because you're essentially stimulating the feeling of power without actually generating any power, which is an essential kind of component in, if you're basically, and it has sort of the same effect as pornography, which is that it decreases the amount of sex in the world, because you're actually, when you convince people to sort of bite on the hook of something that appears to be power and is not really power, then, nothing happens. And you've basically taken away their power in a very beautiful form, because you've taken away their power by convincing them that they actually have power. Very smooth move. The more you sort of learn about how these Jedi mind tricks work, the more you have to admire them, right? And it's not like anyone really. There's no central control here. No one designed this stuff. It's just beautiful. It's a piece of nature. And so when you look at essentially the set of people who actually matter, they're the set of people who, number one, can flourish in an oligarchy, which is hard. Ask anyone who's ever gotten a PhD and tried to be a professor. Not so easy, not so fun, really nasty, sharp elbowed environment. And there's a lot, the jobs suck, and there's a lot more people who want them than can get them, which is often just a really nasty combination. When you look at what it takes to get into the loop, it takes a lot of talent and a lot of energy, and just, your soul is sort of worn away along the way. And so you get this sort of government where, do you know the film Election with Matthew Broderick? Classic 90s film. It has this character named Tracy Flick, who's like the class president type, right? She's the high school class president type. You know these people. They're horrible, but are they talented? Are they energetic? Yes, they are. And so you're basically selecting for this really, really wrong worldview of government.
Right. Let's talk about the Machiavelians, Defenders of Freedom, published in 1943, written by James Burnham. What does it mean?
And so, so you're seeing these systems that run on very low energy and very low engagement. And what it reminds you of, again, is like there's essentially two sort of schools of realistic thought.